So, Sue Thomas, thank you ever so much for joining our Desert Island Discs, or Desert Island Diaries, I should call it. My vision behind this is to bring on brilliant, inspiring, influential people that have had a massive impact on the public sector and glean insights from people like you so that we can share them and hopefully inspire other public sector people and other public sector servants. So that's the plan. Last week I interviewed Matthew Cripps and that went really well. So fingers crossed we can do a good job as well. So you'll see in the background on my screen, Sue, that you're in the hammock and we've got some drinks on that little table there. So what drink are you going to order to get you in the zone?
Oh, right. Oh, something non-alcoholic, a non-alcoholic mojito.
Okay, excellent. That's a nice choice. I'll join you in that one. Okay, brilliant. Okay. So I've known you since 2017 quite well. But can you give us a 60-second overview of your career, just so people have got some context for the next questions?
Sure. So my background is in nursing. I originally trained as a RGN in Sheffield, and I worked clinically as a district nurse before I moved into a national position. But I am a district nurse health visitor midwife, and I worked in the community principally in the latter half of my career, which is kind of what was the springboard for me moving into the national position. So after working in policy and practice, I moved into the voluntary sector to do commissioning support. So I've worked in commissioning and commissioning support since about 2008, again in a national position, setting up a project to get the patient voice into healthcare services. So now I'm doing consultancy since COVID, and really enjoying the ability to be hands-on working on specific projects with the NHS in different areas.
Yeah, brilliant. And don't forget you had a senior role in Wilmington Healthcare as well, which is where we first started to work together.
It is, yes. I moved from the voluntary sector to set up the same type of organisation to provide consultation services to the NHS with Wilmington Healthcare. And I was there as CEO of Healthcare Consulting for about 6 years before COVID came in, and we were all thrust into a different environment.
Yeah, brilliant. So a wide experience that you've had, which is great stuff. So strange, but a good way to open, I think, is how did your upbringing have an impact on your career and your career choices and who you are, do you think?
Oh, it had a strong influence, really. My aunt was a nurse. She worked in London. And right from an early age, I've got a picture of me aged about 2 in a nurse's uniform in the garden at home with my dolls. But right from an early age, I knew I wanted to be a nurse. I think it's probably her influence as well, because she was a favourite aunt that I had. But I didn't really envisage doing anything at all. So, you know, she was a very strong influence on my choice to be a nurse. And I never even considered any other career at all. And in fact, I applied to enter nurse training before I'd even taken my O-levels. At that time, you could take an entrance exam to get a place on the nurse training courses. So I took the entrance exam, and I think they laughed at me when I went for the interview and said I wanted to be a nurse and I wanted to take the exam. But I passed it, and I had my place guaranteed for when I was 18, and I couldn't wait to start. So lifelong ambition to be a nurse.
Yeah, fascinating. It just reminds me that when I was interviewing the 20 nurses for Fit to Care, the vast majority have said a similar thing to you, which there's always been a sort of a family member that's influenced that. I don't know if that's the role, the physical role, and the closeness to the role, or if there's a genetic connection. It's probably both. But yeah, really interesting.
Could well be. You never know on these things, do you? But I never even considered any other occupation at all for the whole of my life. In fact, I don't. You know, looking back, I don't really feel that I've had a job, I would have done the job without pay if I could have afforded to live without pay. But it's something that I really wanted to do, and I've never really felt in the morning getting up, I'm going to work. I've always been pleased to actually go to work, because I think we're providing a service for people, and that's really important.
Yeah, just don't let the Treasury listen to this podcast.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay, great stuff. So what got you started in the public sector? You've just pretty much answered this one, but I guess it was always the public sector. You've had that service type feel to your whole life by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I have, but I guess I've worked in different roles within that, so it's not all been clinically facing. And I had a significant time where I really was distressed about the inequity of care that some patients were getting, and in particular patients that had got neurological problems. So the real thing that kind of shifted the direction of my kind of career was having a patient that had motor neurone disease, and I'd never come across it before. And I honestly didn't really know how the disease was going to progress and how I was going to care for him. And so I did a lot of research on that. I got a grant to be able to go and work within one of the units in Oxford to see how patients were being managed, so that I could support him better. And then I pulled together a network locally where I was working, so that we could fast track patients through the system very quickly, because these patients potentially can die fairly rapidly. And that really, kind of struck home to me, the fact that we do need to influence on behalf of our patients. We do need that leadership ability and that power to be able to make change on behalf of patients. And I felt I'd really made that change with my patient. Alfie was called, but the patients that followed him thereafter probably had a better deal, because we got that network set up. We were working together as a team and managing patients with motor neurone disease, and there was an explicit pathway for them to follow, which there hadn't been before. And it was then that I realized that we could probably be a lot more effective as nurses if we took on more of that leadership role and tried to galvanize that, that power potentially to make a difference for patients. And I think patients have always really been very central to what I wanted to do. I wanted things to be better for them. I think we have the ability as nurses to make things better. And so that kind of shifted me onto a different career path, and I moved on then to the Royal College of Nursing.
Yeah, amazing how these things progress. So you've just made a brilliant case for the point that I'm making in the book, which is I genuinely believe that nurses are the foundation for change and improvements in the NHS, because you're so close to that patient. You're the bridge between the patient and the patient needs and the organisation. And I think that example is a brilliant one. You preempted this next question as well, actually, to a degree. That is one key pivoting turning point in your career. What are the other sort of pivotal turning points that you've had through your career?
I think moving into a national position was really a real pivotal moment. It was quite scary, actually, going from being someone who worked as a district nurse to working in a national post when I moved to the RCN. And so that was a real change. But I think subsequently from that, again, there have been things that have been the drivers. So I had a Florence Nightingale scholarship, and I've also had a Winston Churchill fellowship that have enabled me to travel to the USA and to Australia, looking at different forms of healthcare provision. So I went over to the States to look at how telephone technology and webinars were being used to manage patients at distance. I looked at things like high intensity support of patients at home in the community. And they were really quite sentinel moments, I suppose, enabling me to understand how our own health service could actually implement change so that we could keep people closer to home, and so that we could, help to support them more in managing the long-term conditions that they've got. Because a lot of the work that I've done has been with patients who have got long-term neurological conditions or respiratory conditions now, because I've branched out a little bit recently. But I think that it's that patient being central to everything again is a real influencer in terms of the care that's being delivered, and being able to be an advocate for patients is really good. And I think nurses are so good at that, because they understand holistically what patients need, and they're able to articulate that and support them.
Yeah. Do you think what I'm feeling a strong sense of, Sue, is you've always been curious? Is that fair? So you've always been looking out for these opportunities with the RCN. You've always been looking forward to and interested in developing and finding new things and learning new things. Is that fair, do you think? A fair reflection?
Yeah, I think so. I'm always seeking out new ways to do things and looking at what can, make improvements. And I think that, by putting patients central to our services, it is so beneficial, because sometimes we make the wrong choices around what we think patients will want. And they know their own condition, they know what they need, and it's very useful to get their views on the services that they require. And I think I suppose I was trained in a very kind of paternalistic way, that we knew best, and we used to do to the patient. But now I think our role is more in trying to empower patients, help them to direct self-care, keep people healthy. There's a whole change in focus from our illness service to a wellness service now. And I think nurses are really a key part of that, helping people to understand their condition and to keep well.
Yeah, no, 100%. So just having another thought now about the career and reflecting on the career, what have been the main obstacles that you've faced in your career, and how did you get over those?
I guess the obstacles have been where I've had a vision for something, but nobody else has had that vision. So you think this would be a really good idea. This would be a really good idea to do this, but nobody else sees that idea. And I think you have to be tenacious in terms of, trying to implement something that you want, or bring other people on board. So I think there is a huge need for us to develop partnerships, and to look at team working, to use leadership, and actually to be able to articulate, what your vision might be, and get everybody else's opinions. Because what I think might be useful might not be right. I mean, you need colleagues' opinions as well on this. But I think where we've got services that aren't working particularly well, then there is a real need to kind of understand how those services are performing, and to use what means we have available to be able to change those services. And I think a lot of what's happened in the past, change has been made without the evidence to support that change. So I mean, on a day-to-day basis, we've not typically looked at data. I'm a bit of a data geek now, but we never used to look at data and what the outcomes were. We just used to kind of do things as they'd always been done. Whereas now we've got the availability of data to support any changes that we want to make, and be able to influence with things like that. But I do think that the obstacles are where you're trying to kind of do things on your own. You really do need to have that kind of team around you supporting you, and you do need to really understand that you can be the powerhouse and you can lead change if you're in, if you've got the right circumstances around you and the right evidence, and you've got people on your side as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you think that's changed in you over the years? Do you think you've become better at that, at making your points clearer and communicating better? I suspect you've always been an amazing networker, but do you think these things have developed over time?
I think the networking's had to grow. I know when I first went to the RCN, I probably was quite shy and retiring, and I wondered how I would manage. But I was given a mentor to support me in my role. I was given a coach. I had a team around me, the primary care team that I worked with, and we worked quite closely together. And we were a great support for each other. So I think these are things that I've learned over time. It didn't come naturally. I was naturally a shy person. But I think, you know, my confidence grew because I'd got people around me that would support me, and I got that team behind me as well. And I could always chat things through with my mentor and my coach if I wanted to. So the college was brilliant, really, in terms of, you know, being able to provide those sort of support for staff. And then, you know, as time has gone on, I've learned, you know, really how to use evidence more to the advantage, you know, where we wanted to make changes, to use that evidence, and again, you know, to network, to bring people of influence on board. And if you start to look around, you know, you can look who the stakeholders are in particular pieces of work that you're doing, or, you know, what you want to achieve, and galvanize all of those stakeholders together, you know, to kind of support what it is that you're wanting to do.
That picture that you've painted there for me, Sue, in terms of that teamwork and engagement and support with the RCN, that sounds like a brilliant foundation for the rest of your career, which I'm guessing you took with you, and you've generated that in your teams. I personally feel that when I've been working with you. Do you think that the environment's changed since then? Do you think things have become tougher and more pressured, and it's harder to get that support now, or is that not the case, do you think?
No, I think it's hard to get it now. I think at the moment everything's quite overwhelming in the NHS. I mean, you know, we're a couple of years past the pandemic, but I think there is obviously still the aftermath of that with, you know, waiting lists. We've got staff burnout. People are going off sick. It's a very difficult time, I think, to work in the NHS at the moment. There is so much pressure. And I think that, you know, I mean, you've recognised it. You've done your book, Fit to Care. I mean, I think, you know, we need to help staff through these times, because it really is hard out there. And I think people are struggling just to keep their heads above the water in terms of day-to-day work, let alone anything else. There's just no time in the day. You know, everywhere I go in the NHS at the moment, people are under significant pressure. And it's not a nice environment to work in, you know, when you've got that pressure. You've got no time for yourself, you've got no time for thinking. It's just all consuming, which is a shame. I think, you know, it's very different to when I was working clinically. We were busy then, but, you know, things are far busier these days.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And as you say, I definitely feel that from the book research as well. One of the things that really shocked me or impacted me like deeply when the book research was talking to nurses, and I've been in the NHS for nearly 17 years now, but it still shocked me this, and it shouldn't, but it did, was this double-edged sword of, as a nurse, it can be the best job in the world because you're genuinely helping people, you're helping other human beings, which is amazing. But actually, when the resources aren't there and there's too much pressure and you can't care for people the way you really want to, that's almost hellish. It's like really difficult to deal with because you can't do what you want to do and what you've trained to do and what you've come into the profession for. So yeah, it's really eye-opening for me, that research. So yeah. Given that it's so tough, what has been your inspiration and what continues to be your inspiration to keep going and to keep driving for improvements, and what's inspirational for you?
I think, you know, people are so enthusiastic about their role. They want to be a nurse. You know, I'm passionate about nursing. I see, you know, the fantastic thing that nurses do on a day-to-day basis, which, you know, keeps me going as well. But I think that, you know, being able to utilize data, being able to demonstrate with evidence that services are under pressure is very useful. I don't think, you know, that's used enough at the moment, but being able to demonstrate that there just isn't time in the day to actually do the things that are required. So I think, you know, and also looking at what evidence there is around outcomes. So making sure that, you know, what we're doing has got explicit outcomes around what we want to achieve, what's going to make things better for the patient, how are we going to better care for them. And if we, you know, we work looking at what those outcomes we want to achieve are, and also look at, you know, how we can do that most cost effectively. What really annoys me sometimes is the fact that, you know, we've got band 7 nurses who are doing administrative jobs. You know, they're writing their own letters. They're having to chase up things like investigations. You know, a lot of these things could be done by an administrator, but there is, you know, people are often short-sighted, you know, and they don't realize that they, you know, there is that capacity within the system if only people are working to their competence and, you know, doing the things that they have been trained to do. You know, nurses are, specialist nurses particularly, are, you know, are highly specialized, and they, you know, do a highly specialized job. So, you know, they don't need to be chasing investigations and writing letters. Somebody could do that for them so that they could be more productive in terms of patient contact. I think it's, you know, it's recognizing that in terms of quality improvement, we've got to look at that skill mix within the workforce and make sure that, you know, the right people are doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. So you're the second person that I've interviewed in this format, Matthew Cripps, who you also know. But already there's some common themes coming out, and I suspect the more interviews we do, the more common these themes are going to grow. But one of the things that's coming across is that you're the same as Matthew and me, actually, is that curiosity to constantly improve and get better, and that understanding that we don't know everything, and that we're really keen to get, in your case, you're sort of reflecting this through capture of more data. And Matthew was the same. You know, we've got to constantly keep an open mind and keep searching and keep engaging with particularly people on the front line, and I'd argue particularly nurses, so that we keep gleaning more insights so that we can make the right decisions and do the right things. But he also had quite a bit of hope that when we get these things right, we can make massive change, and that keeps us going. That is quite an inspirational thing. So I'm already pulling these themes together, which is great. The people that you've worked with over the years that you've sort of seen as great leaders and great influencers and people that you respect in the public sector, would you say that there's a certain set of themes or characteristics that are common between them, would you say? What are the characteristics of a great public sector leader?
I think they're visionary. I think they are people that have humanity really central to their purpose. I think that they help to instill a sense of belonging to their teams, to the people that they work with, so that they feel included, you know, as part of that team. I think it's hard to say really, but I think that they're not frightened to take risks, and they're not frightened to you know, to speak out about what they want. So I've worked with some great people who have been great leaders, but, you know, they've all, you know, had that vision and kind of power. They're powerhouses really, I suppose. You know, they kind of instill that confidence in you that they know where they're going, they can see the future, and they're bringing people along with them, and they're empowering you, you know, in their kind of following, as it were, to do the same. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. And I guess that ties in with your earlier point around focus on the patient, and meaning is about serving that patient ultimately. And when we've got that in focus, everything else seems to work better.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think I do think that, you know, we have to keep patients central to everything that we do, because, you know, in the past they were kind of almost, you know, people that we did things to, whereas now I think they have to be the central core of everything. So, you know, whatever it is we're designing or wanting to do, I think that should be co-produced with patients. That's, you know, kind of a lot of what I do now.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And my big piece of work at the moment is to try and to develop and continually improve Insight Genie so that we can use Insight Genie as a tool to engage with frontline staff members in particular, but also patients, so that we've got that insight, but we can glean it really quite easily and quickly and cheaply, because normal qualitative data collection methods are just really time consuming and expensive. And I think there's loads more we can do there to, again, support managers in making those right decisions.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic background, Sue. In terms of going forward now, and again, supporting those people listening that are in the public sector and want to improve and develop, from your history and background and experience, what are the top 3 recommendations you'd pass on to other public sector leaders and people in the public sector?
I suppose number 1 is you can't do it on your own. No matter how hard you try, you've got to have other people working with you to be able to effect change. You know, you can be a visionary, but there's no way you're ever going to get anywhere unless you bring everybody on side with you. So I think it's important to network. I think it's important to understand who the stakeholders are that you're going to be working with, and to include those and to get their ideas, you know, to build a rapport with them. I think that's, you know, that's really, really important. And then, you know, the other thing is, you know, people seem to be changing roles so rapidly these days. I mean, you know, in commissioning where I work, you know, 1 week we've got one commissioner for neurology services, and 2 weeks later it's a different person. So it's really hard for them, you know, if you're kind of in a senior position, it's sometimes really hard for people that have just been dropped into a job to understand what the priorities are and what they need to do. And, you know, they may not have that specialist knowledge. But I think as nurses, you know, we can be really very supportive in terms of providing more detail around what's required for our patients, what's required for the service. And I think, you know, we shouldn't be frightened to speak out. So I think, you know, in turn, managers shouldn't be afraid to ask the people that are already working within their service, you know, what's needed, what's their vision, how do they see things. So I guess, you know, that's the kind of the top thing. And also to think about, you know, the patients as well. As I said, you know, keeping patients central to what we do is really important. So I don't think that managers should forget about that, you know, that we need to use the patient voice as well on this, so that we've got their opinions too, because they can be quite insightful, patients. And, you know, very often where you've got to make some harsh decisions about what services are required, it can be patients that actually inform you around, you know, what they would like to have, that might be preferable if there's a choice got to be made. So, you know, keep them in your sights as well.
I agree.
Might be a bit to what everybody else has said.
No, I agree 100%. I think the patient has to be our absolute focus, and it's that shared decision-making piece. I know we did some work around clinicians believing that they're undergoing and good at shared decision making, but they'll still sort of almost aggressively suggest certain treatments because they've been trained to treat. But actually, if you really genuinely take a step back and listen to patients, they might not want the knee operation because that will affect the gardening, and the gardening is the be all and end all, not the fact that they might be able to run half a marathon afterwards. Those sorts of things. I think it's really, really critical that focus is on shared decision making, focus on the patient, and then everything else, including all the pathway work, so that we can work together to ease that throughput and pass on the relevant information to the next person in the pathway. All that is all connected to really valuing the patient, isn't it? As opposed to, this is my area, I've got my checklist to do today. I'm not really thinking about the patient. I'm thinking about my checklist. So for me, the patient is the be all and end all, and then everything flows from that.
Yeah.
Excellent. You mentioned mentorship earlier. Has mentorship played a significant part in your career, and would you recommend it for people going forward? Is there anything else you could tell us about that we could pass on as useful tips?
Yeah, I think mentorship is really important. I've been very grateful throughout my career, really, that I've been able to access mentors, particularly, after I moved to the RCN. And I think it's essential, really, because, sometimes you're out of your depth in terms of, the role that you've got. I mean, I went from, local nurse to national voice, and it was quite scary. But having a mentor was really useful, somebody to bounce ideas off and give me some support in terms of thinking out what my direction needed to be, looking at different ways to do things. So not being directive, but just being supportive in terms of helping me to talk through things. And I've acted as a mentor myself to nurses who have been doing training. And I think it's useful just to know that there is somebody there that you can bounce your ideas off and who will give you some sound advice around, what your thoughts are.
For people listening that may be thinking there's no budget for me to have a mentor, would you say that it's possible to sort of just network with people and say, listen, can we work with each other and bounce off each other and help each other out? And we'll help each other out, and we'll, it's just not a one-way street. Is that something that you'd recommend, given that the budgets are tight?
Yeah, well, I don't think I've ever had a paid for mentor. It's been, part of my kind of, my kind of working week. I was allocated mentorship time. I mean, I think that was valuable in terms of time away from the work, but quite a lot of what I do now, and I've done over the last, 20 years or so in my involvement with the Neurology Academy, we have, on a voluntary capacity, mentored clinicians, nurses, allied health professionals, to support them in developing their specialist knowledge of neurological conditions and to support service change. And I think that it's kind of part of that public sector ethos, isn't it? It's about giving something back. So, I've been very grateful to the people that mentored me. They weren't paid to mentor me, and now I can give something back to other people by mentoring them. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask somebody if they would be your mentor. Nobody that I can recollect has ever refused me. I mean, it may be that you are quite, time is quite consumed with work, but it's worth asking people. I mean, I guess that's part of the, the whole thing. The leadership is having the confidence to ask people to do things for you. And if they say, no, I don't have time, then don't, take that as a, an affront and don't ask somebody else. But, you can pick out people that would be useful to you. And again, I've used people that weren't within the health service, in terms of mentorship, where I've wanted to go down a bit of a different route. So when I started looking particularly at data and how that needed to influence services, I didn't use a nurse or a healthcare professional. I used a data analyst and asked them to work with me as a mentor to coach me through, well, I had a mentor and a coach, so that I could understand what I needed to know about, and then I could get from A to B with their support. So I think there is a room. There's room for people to find mentors, and I'm sure that there will be people willing to take that on.
That's brilliant advice, Sue. And would you be open, if people listen to this feel like, I'd love to take Sue up on that mentorship through the academy? Would you be open to people sort of reaching out through LinkedIn just to find out a bit more?
Yeah, by all means. If I'm inundated now with thousands of people emailing me, I might change my mind. But yeah, I think and also I'm quite well networked myself, so I know quite a lot of senior nurses or people that are working, you know, in a similar role that might that might also help out. So if those thousands come in after you've sold thousands of your book, then, you know, I'm sure we can come up with something. But I think you know, it's important to try and support colleagues with, you know, with their needs. So yeah, always open. Door is always open.
This is another good segue. So work-wise, and there's a danger of being overwhelmed, especially in the nursing profession. How do you create that balance to make sure that your home life isn't overtaken and you don't get too stressed and those sorts of things? I know you're a bit of a workaholic, so it's a tough question for you, this one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the outset, I don't really ever feel that I'm working. You know, I think I'm doing something that I enjoy doing. I am guilty of being a workaholic. And interestingly, the Fit to Care program has been quite good because it's made me look at things in a different light. You know, doing some of the exercises in that has helped really, you know, looking at how to restructure what I'm doing. So it's worth a read because, you know, it can help you with some, you know, important things that you might not think about yourself. So yeah, I think I'm always going to be a bit of a workaholic. I can't ever see me retiring, really. I, you know, just thrive on work, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of it as well. And at the end of the day, you know, I see that patients, you know, can benefit from what we're doing. So that, you know, gives me pleasure. I'm a big gardener when I've got time. I love my garden. I do quite a lot of gardening and growing vegetables and things like that. And I love traveling. So whenever I can, you know, we go off traveling. Although I do admit I usually take my computer with me, but it's so easy these days to keep in contact with internet. So, you know, I might be relaxing somewhere, but I'm, you know, and I don't advise that everybody does this, but you know, it's the way I work. That's, you know, that's me. So I'm just passionate about nursing, passionate about making things better for patients. So it's that kind of drives my work ethic, really.
Yeah, and thanks. That was unprompted, everybody. I didn't prompt Sue to mention Fit to Care, but it really does make me feel good that, again, it's the same as you. You want to make a difference, so I'm really pleased that you're getting something out of the book. And Steve Ham said exactly the same, and he was unprompted as well. So that's great. Really pleased. What would your top 3 recommendations be in terms of resources or books or courses or anything like that that you'd recommend to public sector people that are listening, eager to learn new things?
Well, I guess it's quite difficult, really, because there are so many different specialties, aren't there? And I focus predominantly on things like neurology and respiratory at the moment, rather than any kind of generic things. But I think, you know, being able to network at conferences is really good in terms of the disciplines that you're working with, you know, networking with other healthcare professionals. So I guess I don't really have any particular suggestions on that. I mean, things that I read regularly are things like Health Service Journal to keep up to date with things, BMJ. I do a lot of article, you know, looking at articles within journals around the different disease areas that I'm working in. So I guess it's probably not as useful to people. They're very specific, I suppose, to the areas of work that I'm in. So, but I do think, you know, being able to go to things like conferences, I know money's tight these days, but, you know, being able to attend things like conferences where, you know, they relate to the particular area that you're working in are really quite useful. And I get a lot out of that, not only from the content of the conference, but also from the networking with the people that are attending.
The valuable side to that is think outside of your local team. Start thinking about networking, start thinking about events. There's, you know, quite a few online events as well that are free, aren't there? It's getting out there.
There are, yes. There are, yes. And I guess, you know, all of the areas that I've worked in, like I mentioned at the beginning, I had a Florence Nightingale scholarship and then a Winston Churchill fellowship. You know, there hasn't been money available within the NHS for me to be able to get the expertise that I developed. But what I did was I sought out a means by which to get that expertise. So I applied for the scholarship. You know, you're up against a huge number of people that are applying, but all the same, you know, you stand as much chance as everybody else if your case, you know, the case that you're making is good. And you know, when I worked at the college, I originally went in on a 3-year secondment there to fill somebody's post that was doing a PhD. But then because of the work that I was doing there, we were able to generate the funds for me to stay there. And I ended up being there, you know, not just for 3 years, but for 18 years. And that was, you know, really simply looking at avenues that would support the areas that I was working in. So developing the policy around management of long-term conditions for the future, because it wasn't, you know, quite as important then as it is now. But, you know, there's always a means to an end, I think, in terms of, you know, finding resources and finding the information that you need to kind of support you in your career. It's just a matter of looking where that is. It's hard to do that as well. I know people don't have the time, but it does pay off, you know, to perhaps reach out and see what is available so that you can do the things that, you know, learn the things that you want to.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Sue. And then given where we are at the moment, I think all public services are really struggling. We're closest to the NHS. I think something like 7 million on the waiting list at the moment, something like that. There's a lot to sort of be concerned about, but how would you put across a little summary message of hope? What would your message of hope be to everybody?
I think that things have changed a lot over the last few years. We are in a difficult position, but we've got huge transformation opportunities now. You know, people are looking at things in a much different way. With the integrated care boards in England, you know, there is a lot more around population management. So actually looking at what the population needs are, trying to respond to that, looking at, you know, what's the causes of ill health. I know we've got phenomenal waiting lists, but, you know, people are trying to, you know, there are lots of initiatives where people are really trying to get through those waiting lists and work in different ways to be able to address that. So I think there is tremendous hope for the future. You know, I've been working in neurology for a long time. I was on the original National Service Framework for Neurology that was developed in 2005. I was on the stakeholder group of that. And now we've got a national clinical director, we've got a neurology transformation programming process. There's lots happening. So, you know, for the first time, it really seems that things are changing and there is such enthusiasm from everybody. They're all really busy, but there is such enthusiasm. So I think that, you know, the transformation agenda in the NHS is really, you know, driving people's interest and, you know, making people want to do things differently. And I think there is also a big movement from patients themselves to try and do a lot more on self-management and self-care. So I think the future does look bright. We've just got to do things in a different way. And we'll get there. So, you know, I'm very hopeful that things will improve and the NHS will be able to look after me when I need it to look after me. But I think, you know, an essential part of that NHS is obviously nurses and nursing. And I think we have such a difference that we can make to the NHS that, you know, my hope is that, you know, we get that recognition and, you know, we are recognised for the value that we bring.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. So thanks ever so much. The summary from my perspective is patients first, continually be curious, constantly looking to improve things, get that networking done, build your confidence. There's loads we can do. Reach out, get some mentors under your belt, reach out for opportunities for growth, you know, paid and unpaid. It's been really insightful interview. I really genuinely appreciate it. I'm sure lots of people will glean lots from this as well. You mentioned earlier, Sue, about the characteristics of great people. Is there anybody you'd recommend to showcase to come on and to tell their story?
Alison Leary is very good. Professor Alison Leary. You may have contacted her previously. I think she would be quite insightful, really, and she's a great advocate for nursing. So she might be quite good to have. I'm just trying to think. Well, what about somebody like a former General Secretary of the RCN? So Christine Hancock. She's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
She might be useful to chat things through with. She's been a powerful leader. She's done a lot in her time. The other person that might be quite interesting to speak to, if you could get him, is Howard Catton, who is the Chief Executive of the International Council of Nurses.
Right, great stuff.
He would give you an interesting perspective, I think, because he's working globally now. He was at the college, but he works globally now.
And just for a bit of a light humour, so what's your favourite song?
My favourite song? Oh my God. Okay, so I quite like Alan Parsons' project, Eye in the Sky. That's probably it's not anything anybody would listen to, though, that is it? Well,
they might go and have a listen now after this.
I tell you what I do like. I like Maroon 5, Girls Like You.
Excellent. Okay, that's your official choice on the hammock.
My official choice on the hammock is Girls Like You by Maroon 5 and Cardi B.
Excellent. Okay, I'm now going to leave you in peace, and I'm going to order you another drink so you can relax in the hammock now.
All right, I'll have another non-alcoholic mojito.
Well, you can have an alcoholic one now.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks again, Sue. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.